Her true story, from Oregon. At 63 they told me, "You don't decide anymore." That was their mistake. "You're too old to be making demands. You don't get to decide anything anymore," Richard barked, his voice echoing off the walls of his overly polished living room. His tone was thick with mockery, that sneer curling the corners of his mouth like it always had when he thought he was the smartest man in the room. I sat there, back straight, hands folded over my handbag, trying not to let the sting show. The others, his sister, his second wife, even his grown son from his second marriage, nodded quietly, as if this was gospel. Like the final word had been spoken, and my role now was to quietly accept it. I'm Evelyn, 63 years old, a widow, a mother who just buried her only daughter, and now a grandmother trying to make sense of what comes next. It had only been 3 weeks since the accident. Emily, my beautiful, stubborn, sweet Emily, taken in a split second on Highway 22 by a jackknifed truck in the rain. 6-year-old Lily had been in the back seat. Miraculously, she survived with only minor bruises, but the trauma was clear in her eyes, the way she clung to me at the funeral, silent and shaking. I'd been living alone for years in a modest home in the suburbs of Eugene. Quiet mornings with tea, volunteering at the library on Thursdays, tending to my small vegetable garden, until everything changed. When I found out Emily was gone, the world tilted on its axis. I didn't just lose a daughter. Lily lost her entire world. And in that moment, I knew I had to step in, but I hadn't expected the fight. I hadn't expected Richard. Emily had cut off most contact with her father years ago, after he missed her wedding and then forgot Lily's second birthday. Their relationship had always been fractured, his absence during our divorce, his focus on his new life and family. But now, he and his clan were suddenly deeply concerned about family unity. It wasn't about Lily's well-being, it was about control. It was about money. "You live alone. You're on a fixed income. You're in your 60s, Margaret said, her tone clipped like she was reading from a checklist of reasons I should be disqualified. "It's not practical." "I may be old," I said softly, "but I'm not incapable." Richard scoffed. "Please, you can barely handle a cell phone. You think you can raise a child again?" "I raised Emily, and look where that got you," he muttered. A silence fell over the room. Even Margaret's lips tightened at the cruelty of that remark. I stared at him, not with anger, but with something worse, pity. I could feel my heart pounding, but I wouldn't cry in front of them, not now, not after that. "I'm not here to argue," I said finally. "I'm here because I love my granddaughter. She needs structure. We can provide that," Richard said, gesturing around the cold, pristine room that looked like it had never hosted a child. "She needs to be loved." "That's different," I replied. He waved a hand. "You want to play saint? Fine, but the court will never give guardianship to someone your age, especially not someone living alone with no job." That one landed. Since Harold passed, I'd been living off his pension and a small retirement fund. I had no flashy home, no shiny SUV parked in the driveway, but I had one thing they didn't. I had Lily's heart, and she had mine. Still, I stayed quiet. I stood slowly, picked up my coat, and made my way to the door. Richard didn't offer to walk me out. As I stepped into the crisp air, I didn't feel defeated. I felt clear. They thought this was about a legal battle, that I'd quietly disappear once the court got involved, that I was just some grieving woman with shaky hands and foggy memories. They were wrong. I drove home, the weight of their words still sitting heavy on my chest. But I didn't cry. Not this time. I opened my old journal, the one with the cracked leather cover, and began to write. Not just my thoughts, but facts, dates, statements, names. I wrote down every cruel word, every dismissive look. I took notes on the way Lily clung to me at the service, how her little hands searched for mine under the pew. I knew what they were about to do, and I knew they'd underestimate me every step of the way. Good, let them, because now I wasn't just Evelyn. I was Lily's last line of defense, and I was just getting started. A few days after that awful confrontation, I learned that Richard and his family had already filed for legal guardianship of Lily. I hadn't even had the chance to gather my breath after burying Emily. Her favorite flowers on the grave hadn't even wilted. Yet somehow, the paperwork was already in motion. It felt coordinated, too well-timed. cold, but what truly twisted my stomach came late one night when I returned to the funeral home to pick up a copy of Emily's death certificate. As I passed the side hallway, I heard voices echoing from the small conference room. The door was cracked open just an inch. Inside were Richard, his son Jeff, and Margaret. "It's not just about the girl," Jeff said flatly. "The government aid's going to be generous, especially with both parents gone now. And don't forget the policy," Margaret added. "If we're listed as guardians, we'll control it." "Right," Richard muttered. "We just need to manage the money correctly. Put it in Lily's name, but structure it. Keep it clean for taxes. The court won't question anything if we make it look proper." There was not a single mention of Lily's needs, her grief, her future. No talk of therapy, of bedtime routines, of the trauma that girl had endured. Only numbers, only logistics, like she was a locked account they needed access to. I felt sick. I backed away, careful not to make a sound, my heart racing. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, the clock ticking painfully loud. I thought about how they had looked me in the eyes and questioned my motives, how they called me old, incapable, outdated, and all the while, they were already circling Lily like vultures. I opened Emily's old file folder, the one she used to keep in her bedroom dresser drawer. I had brought it home after the accident, unsure what to do with it. It was mostly receipts and bills, but in the back, I found a copy of her life insurance policy. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. Under beneficiary, it listed Lily Thompson, daughter, sole recipient. There it was, in black and white. The policy wasn't for Richard, or for Margaret, or for Jeff. It wasn't even for me. It was for Lily. The amount made me inhale sharply. $250,000, 0 cents. Enough to pay for school, medical care, therapy. Enough to build a life. Enough, I realized, to be worth fighting over. For those who didn't see Lily as a child, but as a check. I turned the page. My stomach dropped again. The date on Richard's petition for guardianship? It had been filed 3 days before the funeral, before we had even scattered Emily's ashes, before Lily had even begun to process the loss. I pressed my hand to my mouth and sat back in my chair. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. Instead, I began to take notes. I photocopied everything. The policy, the petition date, even the timeline from the funeral home. I organized it all into a new binder, labeling each tab carefully. This wasn't just grief anymore. This was a case. And I was going to build it like my life depended on it, because hers did. For the next several weeks, Lily remained in the custody of Richard and his family. The court had granted them temporary placement while the guardianship proceedings unfolded. I was allowed supervised visits twice a week, 2 precious hours on Wednesdays and Sundays. At first, I clung to those hours like air. But the more time I spent with Lily, the more I realized something wasn't right. She would arrive wearing mismatched clothes, sometimes a size too small or stained from days of wear. Her hair, once brushed lovingly each morning by Emily, now hung tangled. She had small scratches on her arms, and when I asked what happened, she shrugged and said, "I fell." But the bruises didn't look like falls. They looked like carelessness. One day, as we sat in the park, I asked her what she had eaten that day. "Cookies," she said, licking the crumbs from her fingers. "Just cookies." "Nothing else?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Nope, and juice, but it's the kind that tastes funny." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I began documenting everything. Photos of the bruises, screenshots of our text messages, notes of what she wore, what she said. I logged the times she seemed lethargic, the moments she grew anxious when asked about her living situation. But the moment that truly broke me came one Sunday afternoon. We were sitting on a bench near the library, and I mentioned something about how nice it would be to have Lily stay over for a weekend sometime. She flinched. Her eyes darted to the chaperone sent by the court, an aunt from Richard's side, and she shook her head quickly. "I can't, Grandma." I bent down. "Why not, sweetheart?" She looked away. They said if I ask to stay with you, I'll get in trouble." That night, I could not sleep. I walked through my house, haunted by the silence. Every corner filled with memories of Emily's laughter and Lily's tiny feet chasing her cat down the hallway. I needed proof, something more concrete than my observations. So I contacted Rachel, the young attorney who had been helping me with the guardianship paperwork. I asked her a simple question. Would it be legal for me to ask if the child monitor in Lily's room is still active? Rachel looked puzzled. Why? I explained that Emily had once told me she installed a child monitor camera to keep an eye on Lily during the nights, especially when she was younger. Lily used to sleepwalk, and Emily wanted to make sure she was safe. Rachel nodded. It's not illegal to ask. Let me help you request documentation regarding the property Lily is currently living in. A few days later, we received a response. There had been a monitor, but it had been removed. No explanation, no mention of where it went or why. And then, just before midnight one Friday, my phone rang. It was Lily. She was whispering so quietly I could barely hear her. Grandma, I don't want to be here anymore. I sat up straight, heart pounding. Where are you, sweetheart? I'm in my room. I snuck the phone from the kitchen. I just wanted to say, I miss you. I held back tears. I miss you too, so much. She paused. They yell a lot. And sometimes they forget I'm here. The line went quiet after that. I knew she had hung up out of fear of being caught. But those words, those tiny trembling words, would never leave me. The next day, I printed out our call log and added it to my growing binder. I had the bruises, the photos, the testimony of neglect, but now I had something even stronger. I had Lily's voice. I sat across from Rachel in her modest downtown office, the kind of space with mismatched chairs and legal books stacked like barricades. She was young, 30 at most, but her eyes carried the kind of sharpness that made you pay attention. I want custody of my granddaughter, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. Rachel folded her hands. Mrs. Thompson, I reviewed your initial petition. You're fighting an uphill battle. The court typically favors the current guardian unless there's clear evidence of harm or misconduct. I nodded. I don't need easy. I need possible. Rachel smiled slightly. I've worked cases defending seniors before, mostly in elder abuse or housing disputes. Guardianship battles. They're trickier. Courts look at age, income, medical history. I know what they look at, I interrupted. They see a number, 63, and they stop listening. Rachel didn't flinch. She leaned forward. Then we make them listen. But we'll need hard proof, Evelyn, not suspicion. Evidence. And that's when the plan began. The next morning, I pulled out every receipt, every document Emily had ever handed me. I started logging my visits with Lily, typing detailed accounts immediately after each one. Rachel helped me draft official requests for financial records. Specifically, the government issued survivor benefits for Lily and any disbursements from the life insurance. She showed me how to file public information requests, how to discreetly request Lily's school attendance and medical records. I learned how to ask the right questions, how to press gently but persistently, and how to document every interaction. I went back to the grocery store where Margaret always shopped and casually asked the cashier, an old friend from church, if she had seen Lily around. She's with her grandfather sometimes, she said, but mostly it's Jeff or no one. That little girl's always in the cart alone, chewing on crackers. I made a note of it. Every day became a quiet investigation. I took pictures of Lily's bruises during visits, always noting the date and time. I recorded voice memos right after she'd say something odd, like, "They said I'm not supposed to call you at night," or, "I sleep with my coat on sometimes 'cause the heater's broken." I didn't confront Richard. Not yet. I let him believe I was old and harmless, but I was watching, always watching. And then one Saturday, a neighbor from 2 streets over knocked on my door. She was in her 60s, wore oversized glasses and always had too much perfume. We'd spoken a few times at the town market, nothing more. But that day, she looked serious. "I heard through the grapevine that you're fighting for your granddaughter," she said. I nodded. "Well, I don't know if this helps, but I live right behind Richard's house. I've seen that little girl, sitting in the car sometimes, hours. One day, it was hot as blazes and she was just in there. Windows cracked maybe an inch. I almost called someone. I grabbed my notebook. Would you be willing to write a statement? Or testify?" Darlene hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "If it helps keep that baby safe, yes. Absolutely." That was my third pillar. Financial abuse, medical neglect, and now, endangerment. Rachel reviewed everything we'd collected. "This is strong," she said. "It's not bulletproof, but it's compelling." "Good," I replied. "Then it's time." "Time for what?" "To let Richard know I'm not going away. And neither is the truth. The last time Richard and I stood face to face without shouting, lawyers or signatures between us, it was 1993, and he was packing up his ties into a suitcase, telling me he needed more than this. I didn't beg. I didn't cry in front of him. But that day, a part of me folded in on itself, a trust I never quite got back. Now, 30 years later, he sat across from me at a diner off Route 99, sipping coffee like this was just another Tuesday. His second wife had left him 5 years ago. His son had moved to Phoenix. He looked older, thicker around the middle, but his eyes held that same glint of smugness. "You wanted to talk?" he said. "I did." I slid a folder across the table. Inside, printouts of Lily's government benefit records, transaction logs, and itemized purchases made in her name. "I just wanted to see what you had to say before the judge sees all this." He didn't open the folder, just laughed under his breath. "You went through all this trouble. For what?" he asked. "Custody of a kid you can't even keep up with?" "She's my granddaughter, and she's also worth quite a bit now, thanks to Emily's policy," he said, finally lifting his gaze to meet mine. "Come on, Evelyn. Don't act like you're doing this out of pure love. You're not a saint. You want that money just as much as I do." That was his version of honesty. Cynical, hollow. I didn't flinch. "You think I'm like you," I said quietly, "but you always did confuse love with leverage." He leaned back, arms crossed. "At least I'm honest about it." I reached into my purse and laid down the first receipt. "You used Lily's survivor benefits to buy a new television, a 72-inch Samsung." He smirked. "She likes cartoons." I pulled out another. 4 nights at a resort in Bend. 2 adults, no child listed on the booking. Needed a break. Another. $800, 0 cents on a gaming console. "She plays Minecraft." "She's 6, I said flatly. He rolled his eyes, clearly tiring of the game. "You done?" "No," I replied, "but the court will be." There was a flicker in his expression, just for a moment, before he covered it with that same old sneer. "You really think they'll pick a gray-haired retired woman over me?" "I do," weighing on my shoulders. I leaned forward. "Because I never left her. I never used her. And I'm the only one who still calls her by her full name, Lily Grace, because that's what Emily called her. Every night." He said nothing. "We'll let the court decide who's here for love," I said, standing. I walked out, without looking back. The courtroom was as quiet as a chapel when I walked in. My hair, silver and neatly pulled back, felt like a flag of surrender, or at least that's how I imagined they saw it. To Richard's side, his lawyer whispered confidently, while Margaret adjusted her blazer with that smug little smirk she reserved for people she thought were beneath her. I didn't dress to impress, just a navy cardigan, my best slacks, and a necklace Emily had made for me when she was 10. I didn't come to convince the world I was perfect. I came to show the truth. When the judge entered and the proceedings began, Richard's lawyer wasted no time painting me as a relic. "Miss Thompson is 63, retired, living on a modest fixed income. She resides alone in a home not equipped for a growing child." Then came the kicker. "And while we don't doubt Ms. Thompson's emotional attachment, the question before this court is, can she realistically provide long-term stable care for a minor?" I sat silent, expression neutral, as he continued. "Meanwhile, my client and his family offer a household with structure, financial stability, and a multi-generational environment that the child is already familiar with." They made it sound so simple. But truth, real truth, is never simple. It's messy, it hurts, and it speaks louder than anything rehearsed. When it was our turn, Rachel rose. "Your Honor," she began, "what we are about to present is not just about capacity. It is about intent. It is about behavior. It is about what love looks like in practice, not on paper." Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Thompson, please describe your concerns." I stood and opened the binder we had built over weeks. "This is a photo of my granddaughter, taken after a visit. Note the bruise on her arm." I handed it to the court clerk. Next, I played the audio of Lily's late-night phone call. "I don't want to be here anymore." The courtroom held its breath. I continued. "These are school attendance records showing multiple absences since she moved in with her grandfather." I placed them neatly beside the first photo. "Here are text messages where Lily mentions eating only cookies some days." Another set of pages. Rachel then called Darlene, our neighbor witness. She testified clearly, I saw that little girl locked in a car, alone, more than once, and then the financials. These are bank records showing transactions made from Lily's survivor benefits account, Rachel said, displaying the list on a projector. Among them, a luxury television, resort vacations, multiple electronics, and then the climax. Your Honor, Rachel said, voice steady, this is a receipt for $7,042.00 used to purchase imported hardwood flooring for Richard Thompson's home. The funds were withdrawn from Lily's trust account. A beat of silence. Then the judge leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, would you care to explain this expenditure? Richard opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Margaret. At his lawyer, no answer came. The silence was heavier than any gavel. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at Lily, sitting quietly with the court-appended advocate, clutching the edge of her little cardigan. Her eyes met mine, brave and wide. That was the only victory I needed. The final day of court felt like a dream, suspended in a haze of breathless waiting. The judge re-entered with the same calm, unreadable expression he had worn throughout the proceedings. My hands were folded tightly in my lap, the folder of evidence now closed before me, but its weight still pressed on my heart. Richard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his lawyer whispering something urgently beside him. Margaret stared straight ahead, unmoved. The judge cleared his throat. Having reviewed all submitted materials, heard testimony, and evaluated both the emotional and practical needs of the child, the court has reached a decision regarding temporary guardianship of Lily Thompson. My breath hitched. Effective immediately, temporary custody shall be granted to Ms. Evelyn Thompson for a trial period of 90 days. I felt a jolt of disbelief, sharp, electric, then a flood of warmth spreading through my chest, but I didn't move. Not yet. In addition, the judge continued, his voice sharp now, deliberate, Mr. Richard Thompson and his family are hereby ordered to return all misappropriated funds from the minor's survivor benefits account, totaling $12,849.45. Richard shot upright. What? This is a mistake. The judge didn't even look at him. You may appeal, but based on the evidence provided, your household has failed to demonstrate an understanding of, or commitment to, the child's best interests. I exhaled slowly, still seated, holding back tears. Ms. Thompson, the judge turned toward me, you will be required to meet monthly with a court-appointed child advocate and provide updates on Lily's medical, educational, and emotional well-being. I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Final review will occur in 3 months. As the room began to clear, Richard muttered under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear, You won because you pretend to care. I turned to him, but didn't respond. I had nothing left to prove, not to him, not anymore, because the next moment, the only one that mattered, happened without a word from me. As I stepped into the hallway, Lily ran to me, arms open, eyes wide, and threw herself into my chest. I knelt to her level, wrapping her in my arms, the soft scent of her shampoo making my throat tighten. Grandma, she whispered, you're the only one who really cares. My heart cracked open. I held her tighter, pressing my cheek to her temple. And I always will, baby. The cameras weren't there, no applause, no parade, just the truth, small and powerful, in the arms of a 6-year-old who had seen too much already. Sometimes the biggest victories don't need to be loud. They just need to be felt. I moved into a quiet little town just outside Portland, close enough to Lily's new school, but far from the noise and shadows of the courtroom. It was nothing grand, just a modest 2-bedroom apartment, above a bakery that smelled like warm cinnamon rolls every morning. The spare room was now hers, painted a pale lavender with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and a small bookshelf filled with fairy tales and stuffed animals. Her laughter echoed in the hallway now, not her silence. The first thing I did was re-enroll her in school. I met with her new teacher, her counselor, and her pediatrician. I updated all her files. I put her name, Lily Grace Thompson, on every line and mine beside it. No more ambiguity, no more waiting. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't asking for permission. Each evening, I cooked real meals. No frozen boxes, no paper plates, just pots on the stove and bread warmed in the oven. Lily would sit at the counter and do her spelling while I stirred the soup or peeled apples for cobbler. Sometimes, I caught myself smiling, not because it was easy, but because it was real. Every night, after the dishes were done and Lily had brushed her teeth, She'd bring me a book and curl up beside me on the couch. Her tiny fingers would point to the words she recognized, her voice soft and certain. And when she finally fell asleep, I'd tuck her in, press a kiss to her forehead, and whisper, "You are safe. You are home." Then I'd sit at my little desk by the window and write in my journal. Today, I wrote. Vimai told me I could no longer decide, that I was too old to matter, too alone to fight, too soft to protect. But they were wrong. Every step I took, every paper filed, every truth uncovered, was not for me. It was for her. The one person who never looked at me like I was less than, the one who reached for me in the dark and whispered that I was enough. I chose her, and in doing so, I chose myself. They had underestimated me, laughed at me, brushed me aside, but now they would never forget my name. Not because I raised my voice, but because I refused to be erased. I was not just an old woman. I was a mother, a grandmother, a guardian. And I had chosen to live the rest of my life not in silence, but in truth. The day Lily asked me to walk her down the aisle, I thought she was joking. "You mean with your dad?" I said, closing the scrapbook we'd been flipping through, the one filled with saved invitations, clippings, and fabric swatches. "No," she replied, her voice as steady as it had ever been. "I mean with you." I looked up. She wasn't the timid 6-year-old who once whispered, "I don't want to be here anymore." She was 20 now, taller than me, heart wide open, and stronger than anyone had ever given her credit for. "You were the one who stayed," she said. "You were the one who chose me." So 10 years after the trial, I stood in the vestibule of the old white chapel, my hand wrapped around the crook of her arm. The church bells hadn't rung yet. The flowers, lilies of course, lined the pews. The guests had risen. And Lily, she stood beside me in white satin and lace, veil pushed back, to reveal a face that glowed with love and defiance. "I'm not crying," I said. "You're absolutely crying," she whispered, grinning. I smiled through it. "Only because I'm so proud, and because your bouquet is stabbing me in the ribs." She laughed, soft and warm, then turned serious. "Grandma, I wouldn't be here without you." I squeezed her arm. "That's not true. You'd be here. You just might have forgotten who you were." She nodded, blinking back her own tears. And the music started. Pachelbel's canon in D. And together, step by slow step, we walked. Down an aisle I never thought I'd see, toward a future neither of us could have imagined. 10 years is both everything and nothing. It sneaks up on you slowly, until one day, the child you tucked in is signing her first lease, her first paycheck, her first wedding license. After the custody trial, I kept Lily with me through the trial period, and then, permanently. Richard never contested again. Whether from shame, fear, or both, he quietly vanished from our lives. His family faded into the background too. No more gifts, no more calls, no more threats. And for the first time, Lily was allowed to grow without fear. She joined the school orchestra, learned to play the cello. I saved every program, every ticket stub. She got braces, hated them, loved them, hated them again. She made honor roll 3 years in a row, then got rejected from her first choice college. She cried. I made soup. Then she got into her second choice, a better one, if you ask me, and called me every Sunday night from her dorm room just to say, "Still breathing, Grandma, still choosing." We didn't talk about the past much, not out of fear, but out of peace, because we didn't need to reopen old wounds to remember who we were. She chose psychology, said she wanted to help kids who couldn't always say out loud what they were feeling, said she learned how to listen, not from school, but from the woman who let her cry in the middle of the night without needing explanations. I was there when she brought her fiancé Miles home for the first time. He was kind, soft-spoken, the kind of young man who helped me wash dishes after dinner without being asked. I liked him right away. The night he proposed, she called me first, screamed so loudly I dropped the phone, then cried so hard I had to sit down just to hear her through it. "Will you be there with me?" she asked. "Where else would I be?" I replied. As the ceremony began, the sun poured through the chapel windows like a benediction. I took my seat in the front row, clutching the handkerchief I'd embroidered the night before. It had taken me 3 tries to stitch her name without my hands trembling. The officiant spoke, vows were exchanged, and when they kissed, the entire room rose in applause. Not just for love, but for triumph. Later at the reception, Lily danced barefoot in the grass with her friends, while Miles tried, and failed, to do the worm. Someone handed me a glass of sparkling cider. Someone else hugged me and said, "She's lucky to have you." I smiled. "She saved me too," I said. We chose each other. After the cake was cut and the bouquet tossed, Lily found me sitting beneath a string of fairy lights, watching the stars blink alive in the early evening sky. She knelt beside my chair, just like she used to when she was small and needed lullabies to sleep. "I've never asked you," she said. "Was it scary?" I looked at her. "What, fighting for me?" I took her hand, still warm from dancing. "Terrifying. But I was never alone." "You mean Rachel?" I shook my head. "I mean you. Even when you were too small to speak up, I felt you. Every time I wanted to give up, I remembered the way you held my hand and said, 'Just don't leave me.'" She laid her head on my lap. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Neither am I." We sat like that for a long time. No words, no need, just love. And when she stood to rejoin the party, I stayed beneath the stars, my hand resting on the lace where her head had been, and whispered to the night. They said I was too old to choose, but here I am, chosen, and still choosing. People see the end of a story and think that's where the strength came from. They look at the wedding photos, Lily in white, me in navy blue with a corsage pinned to my cardigan, and say things like, "You must be so proud," or "You're the strongest woman I know." They mean well, they always do, but they never saw the middle. The middle is where strength is born. And mine? Mine came not from being fearless, but from being afraid, over and over, and choosing to stand up anyway. I wasn't always brave. In fact, for most of my life, I stayed quiet. I took care of people. I said thank you when they handed me leftovers and called it generosity. I swallowed slights like vitamins. I tucked rage beneath politeness. And when I cried, I did it behind laundry room doors or inside the car with the engine running and the music up. My marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a performance. He made the decisions. I made dinner. When he left, it wasn't a shock. It was a slow unraveling I'd watched for years. Thread. What did shock me was how quickly people forgot that I had built that home too. How they only saw me as a woman who'd been left, not a woman who stayed and held the roof over everyone's head while it collapsed around her. Then came Emily, my light, my girl with a freckle on her left eyelid and a laugh that made everyone else forget what they were angry about. She was everything I had hoped to be before life got in the way, and when she died, I did too, in a way. Only Lily kept me breathing. They tried to take her from me. They looked at my age and assumed it meant irrelevance. They looked at my grief and mistook it for weakness. But what they didn't know was this: when you've been underestimated long enough, it stops being an insult. It becomes your camouflage. They thought I was soft, but I was steel wrapped in silence. I kept receipts. I took photos. I learned to record conversations and decode financial reports. I turned every wrinkle into a weapon. And when the moment came, I didn't scream. I just showed them what truth looked like on paper. That's the funny thing about getting older. People think you're disappearing, when really, you're just becoming harder to erase. After the court gave me custody, I didn't celebrate. I exhaled, and then I began to build. Not a legacy, not revenge, a life. For Lily, for me, we didn't need much, just safety and time. And in the quiet moments, she would ask me things like, "Did Mom love the beach?" Or, "What's your favorite thing to cook when you're sad?" And I would answer, truthfully, because children remember what you say when you think they're not listening. One day when she was 10, she looked up from her book and said, "Grandma, I'm going to remember you forever." I smiled. Well, I'll try to give you good things to remember. Now, 10 years later, I sit on a porch swing in the evenings with a blanket across my knees, listening to wind chimes and distant laughter from a life I helped preserve. Sometimes I look back and think, maybe the strength wasn't in the big courtroom moment. Maybe it was in every small decision that led there. The choice to stay when I could have left. The choice to speak when it would have been easier to stay silent. The choice to be seen when the world wanted me invisible. I think about the other women like me, sitting at family dinners, hearing their worth reduced to numbers on a check or lines in a will. I want to tell them, you are not a burden. You are not past your power. You are not finished. There is still breath in your lungs and fire in your gut. You are still the author of what happens next. So when they say you're too old to be choosy, you say, I'm not choosy. I'm clear about what matters, who deserves your care, where your truth belongs. I used to be the quietest woman in the room. Now I'm the one holding the pen, and the story I'm writing, it begins, always, with a woman who remembers, and ends with a world that finally listens. If this story reached something true inside you, subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because when we speak, we don't just tell stories. We tell what they tried to bury